This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
The forest breathed around Deerslayer, its ancient trees standing sentinel as he moved through the dappled shadows. Each step was a whisper, his moccasins barely disturbing the carpet of fallen leaves. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, a familiar perfume that spoke of home to the young frontiersman. Beside him, Henry March crashed through the underbrush like a bull moose in rut. Known as Hurry Harry for his impulsive nature, March seemed determined to alert every creature within miles of their presence. "Hurry!" Deerslayer hissed, his keen eyes scanning the surrounding foliage. "You'll have every Huron warrior on us if you keep that up." "Hurry," Harry scoffed, his booming voice echoing through the trees. "What's the matter, Deerslayer? Afraid of a little noise? We're the kings of this forest, and everything in it should know it." Deerslayer winced at the volume, feeling exposed. Every snapping twig set his nerves on edge, his body taut as a drawn bowstring. Their destination, Lake Glimmerglass, beckoned like a siren's call, but the journey was fraught with danger. As they traversed the challenging terrain, the two men found themselves locked in heated debate. The forest seemed to quiet around them, as if nature itself was listening to their clash of ideologies. "Tell me, Deerslayer," Hurry began, his voice dripping with mockery, "why do you put so much stock in the ways of the natives? They're savages, plain and simple." Deerslayer's eyes flashed with passion. "Savages? No, Hurry. They're people, just like us, with their own customs and beliefs. They understand this land in ways we're only beginning to grasp." Their philosophical battle raged on as they navigated treacherous ravines and swift-flowing streams. Deerslayer moved with the grace of his namesake, his body in perfect harmony with the wilderness. Hurry, true to form, rushed ahead, often finding himself in precarious situations that required Deerslayer's steady hand to resolve. As the day wore on, the dangers of their journey became increasingly apparent. Every rustle in the undergrowth could signal an approaching threat. Deerslayer's senses were on high alert, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Suddenly, he raised his hand, signaling Hurry to stop. In a sun-dappled clearing stood a majestic buck, its antlers like a crown of branches. With fluid motion, Deerslayer raised Killdeer, his trusted rifle. The shot rang out, a thunderclap in the quiet forest, and the buck fell without a sound. "That's why they call you Deerslayer," Hurry muttered, a mix of admiration and envy in his voice. As night fell, painting the sky in deep purples and fiery oranges, they made camp in a small clearing. The crackling fire cast dancing shadows on the surrounding trees, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. They shared a meal of venison, the fruits of Deerslayer's hunt, and began to exchange stories of life on the frontier. Hurry's tales were full of bravado and exaggeration, each story wilder than the last. Deerslayer listened patiently, occasionally offering a quiet correction or a thoughtful observation. As the night deepened, their conversation turned to what awaited them at Lake Glimmerglass. "I tell you, Deerslayer," Hurry said, his eyes gleaming in the firelight, "Judith Hutter is the most beautiful girl you'll ever lay eyes on. She's worth braving 100 Huron warriors for." Deerslayer nodded thoughtfully. "Beauty is as beauty does, Hurry. But remember, we're not just going for your courting. There's Watawa to think of, and the dangers that lie ahead." As the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, the two men settled into their blankets. The forest around them came alive with the sounds of night creatures, a symphony of chirps, hoots, and rustles. Deerslayer lay awake for a long time, his mind on the challenges that awaited them at Lake Glimmerglass, and the stark differences between himself and his traveling companion. Just as sleep began to claim him, a twig snapped nearby, loud as a gunshot in the quiet night. Deerslayer's eyes flew open, his hand instinctively reaching for Killdeer. In the dying firelight, he caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the clearing. Was it friend or foe? As he slowly rose to his feet, the shadow melted back into the darkness, leaving Deerslayer with a sense of unease that would haunt him through the night and into the dawn, when their journey to Lake Glimmerglass would resume. Deerslayer and Hurry's journey through the wilderness had been long and arduous. Their path finally led them to the shores of Lake Glimmerglass, a pristine expanse of water nestled in the heart of untamed lands. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the shimmering surface, painting the scene with an almost ethereal beauty. As they stood at the water's edge, catching their breath and wiping the sweat from their brows, their eyes were drawn to an unusual sight rising from the center of the lake. "Well, I'll be," Hurry muttered, shading his eyes against the sun's glare. His voice held a mix of surprise and admiration. "That must be Floating Tom's castle." Deerslayer nodded, his keen eyes taking in every detail of the structure. Built on sturdy piles driven deep into the lake bed, the castle stood as a testament to human ingenuity and the desperate need for protection in these wild territories. Its weathered planks and fortified walls spoke of years withstanding both the relentless elements and potential attacks from unseen enemies. The two men shared a look, silently acknowledging the impressive feat before them. Without a word, they moved in unison, dragging their canoe to the water's edge. The smell of damp earth and pine needles filled their nostrils as they pushed off from shore, the cool water lapping at their hands. With practiced ease, they began paddling towards the floating fortress. The rhythmic splash of their paddles broke the lake's tranquil silence, sending ripples across the water's surface like whispers of their approach. Fish darted away beneath them, silver flashes in the clear depths. As they drew near, the looming structure seemed to grow even more imposing. Shadows played across its rough-hewn surface, hinting at hidden dangers and secrets within. Suddenly, a gruff voice called out from the castle's walls, startling a nearby flock of birds into flight. "Who goes there?" The challenge rang out, echoing across the water. "Friends Tom Hutter," Hurry responded, his booming voice carrying easily across the distance. "It's Hurry Harry and a new acquaintance, Deerslayer." There was a moment of tense silence, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the canoe. Then, with a creak that seemed to resonate through the very air, the castle's door opened. A man emerged, his appearance as weathered and formidable as his home. Thomas Hutter, known to most as Floating Tom, regarded the newcomers with a mixture of wariness and curiosity etched into the lines of his face. "Come aboard, then," he grunted, extending a calloused hand to help secure their canoe. As Deerslayer and Hurry climbed onto the wooden platform, the rough planks solid beneath their feet, two young women emerged from the castle's interior. The contrast between them was striking, like day and night, standing side by side in the fading light. Judith, the elder of Hutter's daughters, moved with a grace that seemed at odds with their rustic surroundings. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face that spoke of intelligence and a yearning for something beyond the confines of the lake. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, lingered on the newcomers with undisguised interest, a spark of curiosity igniting within them. Beside her stood Hetty, a stark counterpoint to her sister's worldly demeanor. Hetty's face held an innocence that seemed to glow from within, her wide eyes filled with a childlike wonder at the world around her. In her arms, she cradled a small fawn, its spindly legs tucked neatly against her chest. The creature's soft brown eyes blinked lazily, seemingly at peace in this strange floating world. Hurry's eyes immediately locked onto Judith, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. "Well now, if it isn't the prettiest flower in all the wilderness," he drawled, tipping his hat in an exaggerated gesture. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken intentions. Judith rolled her eyes, though a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Save your sweet talk, Hurry. It'll take more than flattery to impress me." Her voice carried a hint of challenge, a spark of defiance that seemed to set the very air alight with tension. As introductions were made, Deerslayer found himself observing the family dynamics with keen interest. Tom Hutter's protective stance behind his daughter spoke volumes, his hand never straying far from the musket at his side. Judith's gaze constantly drifted towards the distant shore, as if seeking escape from this floating prison of safety. Hetty, meanwhile, seemed content in her own world, humming softly to the fawn in her arms, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension around her. The group settled around a rough-hewn table, where a meal of venison and corn awaited them. The aroma of roasted meat filled the air, mingling with the ever-present scent of lake water and pine. As they ate, conversation flowed, touching on life on the lake, the constant threat of raids, and the challenges of surviving in the wilderness. It was when the topic turned to the Native Americans that tensions began to rise, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Deerslayer's measured words and respectful tone clashed sharply with the prejudices held by Hurry and Tom, creating a palpable tension that seemed to thicken the very air around them. "They're savages, plain and simple," Hurry declared, slamming his fist on the table with enough force to make the plates rattle. "No better than the beasts in the forest." Deerslayer shook his head, his voice calm but firm, like a steady rock against which Hurry's anger broke. "They're men, same as us, with their own ways and rights to this land." Tom Hutter's eyes narrowed, his voice low and dangerous. "Rights? The only right out here is might, and we aim to keep what's ours." The debate raged on, a microcosm of the larger conflicts that shaped the frontier. Judith listened intently, her eyes flicking between the men, absorbing every word with a hunger that spoke of a mind yearning for broader horizons. Hetty retreated further into her own thoughts, stroking the fawn's soft fur, her gentle touch a stark contrast to the harsh words flying around her. As evening approached, casting long shadows across the lake, Judith offered to show their guests around the castle. "Come on," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "I'll give you the grand tour." She led them through the structure, pointing out the defenses, loopholes for muskets, reinforced walls, and clever mechanisms to repel boarders. Deerslayer noted it all with a mixture of admiration and sadness, recognizing the ingenuity while lamenting the necessity. Each fortification was a reminder of the constant danger that lurked beyond the lake's peaceful surface. Their tour ended on the castle's upper deck, where they found Hetty sitting cross-legged, the fawn nuzzling against her. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, reflecting off the lake's surface like nature's own masterpiece. For a moment, the beauty of the scene seemed to wash away the tensions of the day, leaving them all in awe of the wilderness around them. As Deerslayer leaned against the railing, taking in the breathtaking view, he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The beauty of the moment seemed fragile, like the calm before a storm. In this isolated haven on Lake Glimmerglass, surrounded by the vast wilderness and conflicting ideologies, he sensed that their adventures were only just beginning. The sun dipped below the horizon, its last rays painting the sky in deep purples and blues. As darkness began to creep across the lake, an unnatural stillness settled over the water. The usual evening chorus of frogs and nightbirds fell silent, as if holding their breath in anticipation of something to come. Deerslayer's hand instinctively moved to his rifle, his eyes scanning the shoreline. In the growing gloom, shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, and the once peaceful lake took on a sinister aspect. As night descended upon Lake Glimmerglass, its inky darkness swallowing the last remnants of daylight, Deerslayer couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching them from the forest's edge, waiting for the cover of darkness to make their move. Night descended upon Lake Glimmerglass, its inky darkness swallowing the last remnants of daylight. Long shadows stretched across the tranquil waters, transforming the once peaceful scene into a canvas of foreboding. Within the castle walls, the air grew thick with tension, each breath a struggle against the weight of impending danger. The group huddled close, their eyes darting nervously to the windows, searching for any sign of movement in the encroaching darkness. Tom Hutter's weathered face was a map of worry, deep lines etched by years of frontier life now creased with fresh concern. His voice, low and gravelly, cut through the silence like a dull knife. "They've been here," he muttered, his calloused hands clenching and unclenching. "Stolen from my traps, too. And those smoke signals in the distance? Can't be good." The words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Each member of the group felt the chill of fear creep up their spine, the reality of their situation sinking in like a stone in still water. Deerslayer, his lean frame coiled with tension, drew upon his vast knowledge of Native American tactics. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the room as he spoke, his voice steady and reassuring. "We need to fortify this place," he said, gesturing around the room. "Prepare for a siege. It's our best chance." Without hesitation, they sprang into action. The sound of scraping wood filled the air, a harsh counterpoint to the eerie silence outside. Sweat beaded on their brows as they worked tirelessly, transforming the once welcoming home into a fortress. The smell of fresh cut wood mingled with the acrid scent of fear, creating a potent mixture that hung in the air. As the last rays of sunlight faded, they gathered to take stock of their weapons. The metallic click of muskets being loaded echoed through the room, a grim reminder of the danger that lurked beyond their walls. Deerslayer moved among them, his calm demeanor a balm to their frayed nerves. He directed them with the precision of a seasoned commander, his words painting a picture of their best defensive positions. Hurry, his impulsive nature bubbling to the surface, paced the room like a caged animal. His voice, tinged with a mix of excitement and fear, cut through the tense silence. "Why wait for them to come to us?" he argued, his fists clenching and unclenching. "Let's take the fight to them." Tom's eyes glinted with a different kind of hunger. The promise of financial gain through collecting scalps for bounty danced in his mind, a temptation he had succumbed to before. His voice, low and persuasive, added fuel to Hurry's fire. But Deerslayer stood firm, a pillar of moral strength amidst the swirling currents of fear and greed. His words, measured and resolute, cut through the chaos like a shaft of sunlight through storm clouds. "No," he said, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. "We defend. We seek peace if we can. There's been enough bloodshed in these parts." Judith, who had been quietly observing, felt her heart swell with admiration for Deerslayer. In the flickering candlelight, she saw him anew, not just as a skilled hunter, but as a man of principle and courage. Her gaze lingered on him, a newfound respect blooming in her chest like a delicate flower in harsh terrain. As the night deepened, Deerslayer took charge once more. With the precision of a seasoned commander, he organized watch schedules, ensuring that vigilant eyes would always be scanning the darkness for any sign of approach. The castle, once a place of refuge, now felt like a powder keg ready to ignite at the slightest spark. Hours crawled by, each minute stretching into an eternity. The group sat in uneasy silence, their minds racing with thoughts of what the dawn might bring. Would it herald salvation or destruction? The weight of uncertainty pressed down upon them, as suffocating as the darkness that enveloped the lake. As the first hints of gray began to tinge the eastern sky, each member of the group found themselves lost in reflection. They contemplated the potential dangers that morning might bring, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that their lives might never be the same again. Suddenly, a twig snapped in the darkness outside, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the stillness. Every head whipped towards the source, breath held, muscles tense. In that moment, as the night air hung heavy with tension, a palpable weight pressing down on the small group, Hurry and Tom exchanged a look of grim determination. Without a word, they began to gather their weapons, their intentions clear. The ill-conceived mission was about to begin, and the atmosphere crackled with unspoken fears and misguided resolve. The night air hung heavy with tension, a palpable weight pressing down on the small group gathered by the lake. As Hurry and Tom prepared for their ill-conceived mission, the atmosphere crackled with unspoken fears and misguided determination. Moonlight spilled across the water's surface, transforming the gentle ripples into a dance of silver and shadow. Deerslayer stood at the shore, his heart as heavy as the humid air around him. He watched his companions ready their canoe, his words of caution falling on deaf ears, drowned out by the siren song of greed. "We'll be back before dawn, with enough scalps to make us rich men," Hurry boasted, his voice barely above a whisper, but sharp with anticipation. Tom's weathered face was set in grim lines as he nodded. "It's justice, plain and simple. They'd do the same to us if they had the chance." As they pushed off from the shore, leaving Deerslayer and the girls to guard the castle, the water seemed to resist their departure. Each lap against the canoe was like a plea, urging them to reconsider. But the men were resolute, their paddle strokes cutting through the calm surface with determined precision. The journey to the Huron camp was a study in tense silence. The occasional splash of water or hoot of a distant owl only served to heighten the men's awareness of the danger that lay ahead. Their minds raced, hearts pounding a steady rhythm of anticipation and fear that echoed the gentle thud of paddles against the canoe. As they neared the shore, the Huron camp materialized from the darkness, a collection of shadowy shapes against the tree line, each one a potential threat. Hurry and Tom beached their canoe with the utmost care, every movement calculated to avoid detection. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches reaching out like grasping hands in the oppressive darkness. Creeping through the underbrush, they approached the sleeping camp. Their breaths came in short, controlled bursts, every sense heightened to a painful degree. The camp lay before them, a deceptive picture of peaceful slumber that belied the violence they intended to bring. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As they crept closer, their confidence growing with each step, disaster struck. A twig snapped underfoot, the sound as sharp and sudden as a gunshot in the quiet night. In an instant, the camp erupted into chaos. A Huron sentry's shout pierced the air, followed by a flurry of movement as warriors sprang from their sleep, weapons in hand. Hurry and Tom found themselves surrounded, the tables turned in a heartbeat. Hurry's face contorted into a mask of desperation as he lashed out with his knife, catching one warrior across the arm. But it was a futile gesture. Strong hands grabbed him from behind, wrestling him to the ground. Tom, less accustomed to close combat, was overwhelmed in seconds, his struggles as ineffective as a leaf fighting against a storm. Bound tightly with rough cords that bit into their skin, Hurry and Tom were brought before the Huron leaders. The firelight cast dancing shadows across stern faces as a heated debate ensued. Words flew back and forth in a language neither captive understood, but the meaning was clear in the hard eyes that regarded them. Finally, a decision was reached. With rough hands, Hurry and Tom were hauled to their feet. The realization of their grave error washed over them like ice water as they were led away from the camp, deeper into Huron territory. As they stumbled through the dark forest, their thoughts turned to the castle and those they had left behind. Deerslayer's warnings echoed in their minds, a haunting reminder of their folly. The vulnerable position of the Hutter sisters weighed heavily on their consciences, a burden far greater than the physical discomfort of their bonds. With each step, the gravity of their situation became clearer. The unknown fate that awaited them at the main Huron camp loomed like a shadow on the horizon. As the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, Hurry and Tom exchanged a look of grim understanding. Their ill-fated expedition had not only endangered their own lives, but had left their friends exposed to the very danger they had sought to eliminate. As they were led further into the wilderness, a sudden realization struck them both. They had left Deerslayer alone to protect the castle and the girls. The weight of their actions pressed down on them, heavier than the bonds that held them captive. What would become of their friends now? And how would Deerslayer, a man of peace, handle the burden of leadership thrust upon him in their absence? The forest seemed to close in around them, the dawn light barely penetrating the thick canopy. As they marched on, prisoners of their own misguided ambition, the fate of those left behind at the castle hung in the balance. The story of the night's disastrous raid was over, but a new chapter was about to unfold, one that would test Deerslayer's mettle in ways he could never have imagined. The capture of Hurry and Tom had thrust Deerslayer into an unexpected role. He now found himself shouldering the weight of leadership at the castle, a responsibility that settled heavily upon him as he surveyed the tense situation unfolding around him. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the tranquil surface of Lake Glimmerglass reflected the fading light like a mirror. The gentle lapping of water against the shore provided a stark contrast to the tension that hung in the air. Deerslayer's keen eyes scanned the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a familiar figure emerged from the dense forest. Chingachgook, true to his word, had arrived as planned. His movements were fluid and silent, barely disturbing the underbrush as he approached. The two men greeted each other with a silent nod, their faces etched with concern. The weight of their shared burden was palpable in the space between them. Deerslayer wasted no time in recounting the recent events, his voice low and urgent. The words tumbled out, painting a grim picture of their current predicament. Chingachgook listened intently, his stoic expression betraying only a flicker of emotion at the mention of his beloved Wah-ta-Wah, also held captive by their enemies. As night fell, the castle became a hive of activity. The flickering light of a nearby fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. Deerslayer and Chingachgook huddled together, their heads bent over crude maps drawn in the sand. The soft scratching of their fingers as they traced potential routes mixed with the crackling of the fire and the distant hooting of an owl. Hours melted away as they meticulously prepared their weapons. The rhythmic sound of stone against metal filled the air as they sharpened knives and checked their firearms. Each man knew that their lives and the lives of their friends hung in the balance of their preparation. The weight of this knowledge was evident in the set of their shoulders and the intensity of their focus. With the first light of dawn, Deerslayer and Chingachgook set out on their scouting mission. The forest welcomed them with a symphony of birdsong and rustling leaves. They moved like ghosts through the underbrush, their feet finding purchase on the softest ground, leaving no trace of their passing. The damp earth beneath their feet and the earthy scent of decaying leaves filled their senses, reminding them of the wild beauty that surrounded them even in these dire circumstances. As they ventured deeper into the wilderness, the forest seemed to close in around them. Thick vines hung like curtains from ancient trees, and the air grew heavy with moisture. Every snapping twig and distant animal call set their nerves on edge, their senses hyper-alert for any sign of the Huron camp. Their expert tracking skills were put to the test as they followed the faintest of trails left by their enemies. A bent blade of grass here, a scuff mark on a tree trunk there. Each tiny detail painted a picture of the Hurons' movements. The forest was a book, and they were its most dedicated readers. It was during this tense journey that fate intervened. As Deerslayer crept through a small clearing, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He froze, every muscle in his body taut as a bowstring. There, not 20 paces away, stood a lone Huron warrior. Time seemed to stand still as the two men locked eyes. The clearing fell silent, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Deerslayer's hand hovered near his weapon, his mind racing through possible outcomes. He raised his other hand slowly, palm out, in a gesture of peace. "Brother," he called out softly, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "We need not shed blood this day." But his words fell on deaf ears. With a blood-curdling war cry that shattered the silence of the forest, the Huron warrior charged. The peaceful clearing erupted into a flurry of movement and sound. Leaves crunched underfoot, branches snapped, and the metallic ring of weapons filled the air. In a blur of motion, Deerslayer found himself locked in a life-or-death struggle. His opponent was skilled and fierce, but Deerslayer's instincts, honed by years in the wilderness, guided his actions. The world narrowed to the space between them, each movement a potential deciding factor between life and death. With a sickening finality, his knife found its mark, and the Huron warrior fell. The sound of the body hitting the forest floor seemed to echo through the trees, a stark reminder of the fragility of life. As the echoes of the battle faded, Deerslayer stood over his fallen foe, his chest heaving. The weight of what he had done crashed over him like a wave. He had taken a human life, something he had never done before. The forest, which had always been his home, suddenly felt alien and oppressive. With trembling hands, Deerslayer knelt beside the warrior. He closed the man's eyes and muttered a quiet prayer, honoring the life he had taken. In that moment, he felt the full burden of his actions, the heavy price of survival in this unforgiving land. The once comforting sounds of the forest now seemed to mock him, a constant reminder of the life he had ended. As he made his way back to Chingachgook, Deerslayer's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. He knew that this act had changed him forever, marking his passage into a new chapter of his life. It would earn him respect among both allies and enemies, but at what cost to his soul? The journey back to the castle was somber, the weight of their discoveries and Deerslayer's encounter hanging heavily in the air. As they approached, they could see Judith and Hetty waiting anxiously by the water's edge, their faces a mix of hope and fear. The setting sun cast long shadows across the lake, mirroring the dark thoughts that plagued Deerslayer's mind. Deerslayer and Chingachgook shared their findings, their voices low and serious. The sisters listened intently, their eyes widening at the tale of Deerslayer's encounter. As the sun began to set once more, casting a golden glow across the lake, the group huddled together, refining their rescue strategy. The added complication of Deerslayer's encounter weighed on their minds as they planned their next move. each acutely aware of the dangers that lay ahead. As night fell and the others retired to rest, Deerslayer noticed Hetty's absence. A sense of unease crept over him as he searched the castle, calling her name softly. It was then that he spotted a small piece of parchment on her bed. With trembling hands he unfolded it, his eyes widening as he read the hastily scrawled message. "Gone to save father and hurry. God will protect me." The realization of what Hetty had done hit him like a physical blow. As he rushed to alert the others, Deerslayer couldn't shake the feeling that their carefully laid plans were about to unravel in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. Hetty's innocent nature and strong religious convictions drove her to take matters into her own hands. Believing she could appeal to the Huron's sense of morality, she secretly planned a solo mission to negotiate the release of her father and Hurry Harry. The night air hung heavy with anticipation as Hetty crept away from the safety of the castle. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of the enormity of her task. The gentle lapping of water against the shore masked her footsteps, nature conspiring to aid her escape. In her trembling hands, she clutched her most prized possessions, a well-worn Bible, its pages soft from countless readings, and a small bundle of food wrapped in a handkerchief, a lifeline for the journey ahead. Moonlight spilled across Lake Glimmerglass, turning the water into a sheet of liquid silver. Hetty's breath caught in her throat as she lowered herself into a small canoe, the wood creaking softly beneath her weight. She took a deep breath, the scent of pine and water filling her lungs, her faith giving her strength as she pushed off from the shore. The dark waters stretched before her like an inky abyss, but Hetty's resolve remained unshaken. With each stroke of the paddle, her arms burned, unused to such exertion. The moonlight danced on the ripples she created, guiding her way across the vast expanse. Her mind wandered to thoughts of her father and Hurry Harry, their faces etched with worry in her imagination. "I'm coming," she whispered to the night, her voice barely audible above the gentle splash of her paddle. The words hung in the air, a promise carried on the breeze. As dawn began to paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, Hetty's canoe finally bumped against the opposite shore. Her legs wobbled as she stepped onto solid ground, muscles stiff from the long journey. The forest loomed before her, a maze of towering trees and dense undergrowth, their leaves whispering secrets she couldn't understand. Hetty's heart raced as she made her way through the woods, every snapping twig and rustling leaf making her jump. She moved as quietly as she could, her eyes darting left and right, searching for any sign of Huron scouts. The forest seemed to close in around her, the air thick with the earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves. Just when Hetty thought she might be lost forever in this green labyrinth, she caught sight of smoke rising above the treetops. The Huron camp was near. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, she clutched her Bible tighter, its familiar weight a comfort in her hands, and stepped out of the forest's protective embrace. The Huron warriors were caught off guard by Hetty's sudden appearance. Their hands instinctively reached for weapons, but confusion quickly replaced aggression as they took in the sight of this young, unarmed girl walking boldly into their midst. Hetty's heart hammered in her chest, but her face remained serene, buoyed by an unwavering faith that seemed to radiate from within. As the Huron leaders gathered around her, their faces a mix of curiosity and suspicion, Hetty opened her Bible with shaking hands. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly in the stunned silence of the camp. She read passages about mercy and the sanctity of life, her words painting vivid pictures of a world where compassion triumphed over violence. The Hurons listened, some with amusement, others with growing irritation. Hetty's simple-minded earnestness was both touching and exasperating to them. As she spoke, a heated debate broke out among the warriors. Some saw her as a threat to be eliminated, while others argued she might be a valuable source of information about their enemies. Oblivious to the danger swirling around her, Hetty continued her impassioned plea. Tears glistened in her eyes as she begged for the release of her father and Hurry Harry, her voice cracking with emotion. The stark contrast between Hetty's naive worldview and the harsh realities of frontier life hung heavy in the air, like a storm about to break. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Hetty's fate remained uncertain. The Hurons' initial surprise had given way to a complex web of conflicting opinions and strategies. Hetty stood in the center of it all, a beacon of innocence in a world of violence and mistrust. Her presence both a complication and a challenge to the Huron's way of life. The day wore on, and Hetty's strength began to waver. Her legs trembled from exhaustion, and her throat was parched from hours of pleading. Yet still she persisted, her faith unshakable even as the world around her grew more threatening. As twilight approached, a hush fell over the camp. The Huron leaders retreated to confer, leaving Hetty alone with her thoughts and prayers. The forest around her seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a decision that could mean life or death. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the edge of the camp. Warriors rushed to investigate, their shouts echoing through the trees. Hetty's heart leapt into her throat as she caught a glimpse of familiar faces in the fading light. Had her father and Hurry Harry somehow escaped? Or was this a rescue attempt that could end in bloodshed? As night descended, the forest pulsed with an eerie energy, wrapping the world in a cloak of shadows. Nocturnal creatures stirred, their soft rustlings a whispered symphony that echoed through the trees. In the midst of this darkening chaos, Hetty stood frozen, her fate hanging in the balance as the night closed in around her. The forest pulsed with an eerie energy as night descended, wrapping the world in a cloak of shadows. Nocturnal creatures stirred, their soft rustlings a whispered symphony that echoed through the trees. Deerslayer felt his heart quicken, the familiar thrill of danger coursing through his veins. He glanced at Chingachgook, his loyal companion, and saw the same determination mirrored in the Delaware's eyes. Years of friendship and shared adventures had forged an unbreakable bond between them, a silent understanding that needed no words. As they crept towards the Huron camp, the scent of wood smoke grew stronger, mingling with the earthy aroma of the forest floor. The flickering glow of campfires painted the night in shades of orange and red, casting long, dancing shadows across the ground. Deerslayer's fingers tightened around his rifle, the smooth wood a comforting presence in his calloused hands. Every sense was on high alert, his ears straining for the slightest sound of alarm. The weight of their mission pressed down on him, a constant reminder of what was at stake. They slipped between the hide-covered lodges like wraiths, their movements fluid and silent. The air hummed with tension, punctuated by the low murmur of Huron voices. And then they saw her, Wah-ta-Wah, bound but unbowed, her eyes flashing with defiance. Chingachgook moved with lightning speed, his knife flashing in the dim light as he cut through his beloved's bonds. Deerslayer felt a pang of envy at their reunion, quickly pushed aside as he focused on the task at hand. With a deep breath, he crept towards a nearby structure, his mind racing. The dry wood would catch quickly, he knew, and the resulting chaos would be their chance to escape. As the flames leapt hungrily into the night sky, Deerslayer felt a moment of regret for the destruction he was causing. But there was no time for second thoughts. The camp erupted into pandemonium. Shouts of alarm pierced the air, the Hurons scrambling to respond to the sudden threat. In the confusion, Deerslayer and his companions began their desperate flight toward the safety of the lake. The forest seemed to come alive around them as they ran, branches whipping at their faces and roots threatening to trip their feet. Behind them, the angry cries of their pursuers grew louder, spurring them on with the urgency of prey fleeing a predator. Deerslayer's mind raced as fast as his feet, weighing their options with each pounding heartbeat. The sound of pursuit grew closer, the Hurons gaining ground with every passing moment. With a sinking feeling in his gut, he realized what had to be done. "Go!" he hissed to Chingachgook and Wah-ta-Wah, his voice barely audible over the sound of their labored breathing. "I'll hold them off." Before they could protest, he turned to face their pursuers, taking up position behind a massive oak. The forest fell silent for a heartbeat, as if nature itself was holding its breath in anticipation of the coming storm. Then the night exploded with gunfire. Deerslayer's aim was true, each shot finding its mark with deadly precision. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air, mixing with the earthy scent of the forest. The Hurons fell back, momentarily stunned by the ferocity of his defense. But even as he fought, Deerslayer knew it was a losing battle. The odds were stacked against him, the Hurons' numbers too great to overcome. Slowly but surely they began to close in, their determination fueled by anger and the desire for revenge. A bullet grazed his arm, the sharp pain a stark reminder of his mortality. Another splintered the bark by his head, showering him with wooden shrapnel. Deerslayer gritted his teeth, fighting down the rising tide of fear that threatened to overwhelm him. He would not go down without a fight, would not dishonor himself or his friends with cowardice. In the end, it was sheer numbers that overwhelmed him. The Hurons swarmed around him like angry hornets, their hands rough as they disarmed him and bound his wrists. As they dragged him back to camp, Deerslayer held his head high, his spirit unbroken despite the gravity of his situation. The Huron camp was a hive of activity when they returned, warriors gathering around with faces that mixed anger and grudging respect. Deerslayer met their gazes steadily, refusing to show weakness even as his heart pounded with fear and uncertainty. As the Huron leaders debated his fate in heated tones, Deerslayer steeled himself for what was to come. He had known the risk when he chose to stay behind, and he did not regret his decision. Whatever trials lay ahead in Huron captivity, he would face them with the same courage and dignity that had defined his life in the wilderness. The night wore on, each moment stretching into an eternity as Deerslayer waited to learn his fate. The air grew thick with tension, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him like a physical force. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Deerslayer found himself at a crossroads. His future hung in the balance, a precarious thread between life and death, with the Hurons holding the knife that could sever it at any moment. Deerslayer found himself in the clutches of the Hurons. His fate hung in the balance, a precarious thread between life and death. The Huron camp buzzed with an electric tension, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and sweat. Deerslayer stood before the tribal leaders, their eyes dark and unreadable as obsidian. He could feel their gazes boring into him, searching for any sign of weakness. "Tell us of the settlers' plans," one of the leaders demanded, his voice as sharp as a flint knife. Deerslayer squared his shoulders, feeling the weight of his loyalty pressing down on him like a physical burden. "I'll not betray my friends," he said, his voice steady and clear as a mountain stream. "Do what you will, but my tongue won't loosen for your benefit." The words had barely left his lips when the first blow landed, a fist connecting with his jaw with a sickening crack. More followed, a hailstorm of violence that left him gasping and reeling. But through it all, Deerslayer remained standing, his resolve as unyielding as an ancient oak. The Hurons, both angered and intrigued by his steadfastness, devised a new challenge: the gauntlet. Deerslayer faced the line of warriors, their faces twisted with anticipation. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp forest air, savoring what might be his last taste of freedom. Then, with a courage that seemed to radiate from his very being, he began to run. The world narrowed to a tunnel of pain and determination. Blows rained down from all sides, but Deerslayer pressed on, his feet barely touching the ground. When he emerged on the other side, battered but unbroken, a hushed murmur of admiration rippled through the crowd. In the days that followed, an unexpected light appeared in the darkness of his captivity. Briarthorn, a young Huron warrior, with eyes that held more curiosity than malice, began to seek out Deerslayer's company. Their conversations, though guarded at first, soon blossomed into a tentative friendship. One evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Briarthorn asked, "Why do you not fear death?" Deerslayer smiled, a gentle expression that seemed out of place in his dire circumstances. "Death comes for us all, young buck. It's how we face it that matters." Through these exchanges, Deerslayer's understanding of Huron culture deepened, like roots spreading through rich soil. He found himself developing a profound respect for their ways, even as he remained true to his own beliefs. The Huron leaders, their admiration for Deerslayer growing despite themselves, decided to offer him a chance at freedom. The test? A display of the marksmanship that had made him a legend among both settlers and natives. The moment arrived, tense as a drawn bowstring. Deerslayer felt the familiar weight of a rifle in his hands, its smooth stock a comfort after days of captivity. The targets were set, each more challenging than the last. With each shot, the crowd's excitement grew, murmurs of awe rippling through the onlookers like wind through tall grass. When the last target fell, a silence descended over the camp, broken only by the distant call of a loon. Deerslayer lowered the rifle, his eyes meeting those of the Huron chief. To everyone's shock, he spoke words that would cement his reputation forever. "I've met your challenge as agreed," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "But I'll not break the terms of our arrangement. My life is still yours as we agreed." The camp erupted in a cacophony of voices, disbelief mingling with grudging respect. Deerslayer allowed himself to be led back to his place of confinement, his head held high, his conscience clear as a mountain lake. As the days passed and the shadow of his execution loomed ever closer, Deerslayer found himself in a state of deep reflection. He thought of the life he'd lived, the forests he'd roamed, the friends he'd made and lost. The possibility of death no longer seemed like a fearsome specter, but rather a natural part of the great cycle he'd always respected. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world seemed to hold its breath, Deerslayer found solace in his faith and in the rightness of his actions. He faced the approaching dawn with a calm that seemed to emanate from his very being, a serenity that continued to baffle and impress his captors. As the first rays of sunlight painted the sky, Deerslayer stood ready to meet whatever fate had in store for him, his spirit unbroken and his honor intact. Yet even as he prepared himself for the end, a flicker of hope stirred in his chest. For miles away, unknown to him, a heart was aching with newfound love, and a desperate plan was taking shape, a plan that could change everything. Judith's heart ached with a newfound love for Deerslayer. The weight of his capture by the Hurons bore down on her, fueling a desperate desire to secure his release. The castle creaked and groaned around her, as if sharing in her anguish. Shadows danced across the wooden floors, cast by the sinking sun that painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. Judith paced, her footsteps echoing in the empty room, each step a reminder of Deerslayer's absence. Her gaze fell upon her father's mysterious chest, tucked away in a shadowy corner. It loomed there like a beacon of hope, its weathered wood holding secrets that might just save the man she loved. Judith's heart quickened as she approached, her palms sweaty as she lifted the heavy lid. A musty scent wafted up, carrying with it the whispers of her father's past. Judith's fingers trembled as she sorted through the items, each touch igniting sparks of possibility. Cool metal of ornate weapons contrasted with the soft caress of faded fabrics. Delicate trinkets winked in the fading light, their promise as alluring as fool's gold. "Hetty," Judith called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her sister appeared, wide-eyed and curious. "We must prepare for a journey." Together they worked in silence, wrapping the most valuable items with care. The weight of their task hung in the air, as thick and oppressive as the summer heat. Pine scent drifted through open windows, a bittersweet reminder of the wilderness that both sheltered and threatened them. As dawn broke, the sisters set out, their canoe slicing through the mirror-like surface of the lake. Every ripple, every distant bird call set their nerves on edge. The forest loomed on either side, its shadows concealing untold dangers. The Huron camp appeared like a mirage, smoke from cooking fires curling lazily into the sky. Judith's heart pounded, a war drum in her chest. She straightened her back, chin held high, and requested an audience with the Huron leaders. What followed was a dance more intricate and dangerous than any Judith had ever known. Her beauty and wit became weapons as sharp as any blade. Words flowed from her lips, painting vivid pictures of the treasures she offered. Her hands moved with grace, demonstrating European tools and weapons that glinted enticingly in the firelight. But for every step forward, the cultural chasm between them seemed to widen. Doubt gnawed at Judith's resolve, fear a constant companion that whispered of failure. Yet the flame of her love for Deerslayer burned bright, refusing to be extinguished by despair. As the sun arced across the sky, the negotiations stretched on. Huron voices rose and fell like wind through the trees, weighing the value of her offerings against the potential advantages of keeping Deerslayer captive. Judith watched, her heart in her throat, feeling herself change with each passing moment. The naive girl who had started this journey was fading away, replaced by a woman who understood the harsh realities of frontier life. She had come armed with trinkets and treasures, But now she realized that securing Deerslayer's freedom might require more than material offerings. As shadows lengthened and the air grew cool, a stark realization settled over Judith like a heavy blanket. The question hung in the air, unspoken but impossible to ignore. What was she truly willing to sacrifice for Deerslayer's sake? The negotiations reached a fever pitch as the day waned. Judith's throat was dry, her voice hoarse from hours of pleading and bargaining. Just as it seemed a resolution might be within reach, a commotion erupted at the edge of the camp. Shouts of alarm pierced the air, and Judith's blood ran cold. Through the gathering dusk, she caught glimpses of movement in the forest beyond. The early morning mist began to creep in, clinging to the lake like a ghostly shroud. It concealed the approaching danger, wrapping the world in an eerie, foreboding silence. The early morning mist clung to the lake like a ghostly shroud. It concealed the approaching danger, wrapping the world in an eerie, foreboding silence. Chingachgook stood at the edge of the castle, his muscles taut with tension. His keen eyes, honed by years in the wilderness, pierced through the haze. There, barely visible, were the telltale ripples of canoes gliding silently across the water. His heart hammered against his ribs as he raised the alarm. "Hurons, to arms!" His voice cut through the stillness like a knife, shattering the false peace of dawn. In an instant, the tranquil morning erupted into chaos. Defenders scrambled to their positions, the sound of their hurried footsteps echoing off the wooden walls. Tom Hutter, his face still bearing the angry red marks of his recent captivity, rushed to the upper level of the castle. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his rifle, the cool metal a stark contrast to his clammy palms. Determination etched itself across his weathered features, each line telling a story of hardship and survival. Below, Hurry Harry took up a defensive position on the lower level. The usual swagger in his step was gone, replaced by a cautious, measured tread. His eyes darted nervously between the approaching canoes and the limited ammunition at his disposal. The weight of their dire situation pressed down on him, squeezing the bravado from his chest. The first volley of shots rang out, a cacophony of death that shattered the morning calm. Bullets whizzed through the air, their high-pitched whine a terrifying melody. Wood splintered, stone chipped, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. The defenders returned fire, their shots precise and measured. Each pull of the trigger was a defiant stand against the overwhelming odds, a declaration that they would not go quietly into the mist. Tom Hutter's voice rang out, rough and commanding. "Hold steady! Make every shot count!" But his words were cut short by a sharp crack, followed by a sickening thud. A Huron marksman had found his mark, and Tom crumpled to the floor. His life's blood seeped onto the wooden planks, each drop a testament to the brutal reality of their situation. Hetty, her heart pure but her mind clouded by misunderstanding, saw the violence unfolding around her. The world seemed to slow as she made her decision. In a moment of misguided bravery, she slipped out of the castle's protection. Her voice, clear and innocent, rose above the din of battle in a plea for peace. But the crossfire showed no mercy. Hetty fell, a delicate flower crushed beneath the merciless boots of war. As if summoned by the dire circumstances, Deerslayer appeared on the scene. His escape from the Huron camp had been timed perfectly with their assault. His eyes, sharp and alert, took in the situation at a glance. The fallen, the desperate, the dwindling hope. Without hesitation, he stepped into the role of leader, his voice steady and sure, a beacon of strength in the chaos. "Chingachgook, take the east wall. Hurry, cover the south. We'll make every shot count," he commanded. His words seemed to infuse strength into his beleaguered companions, straightening spines and steadying hands. Deerslayer's rifle spoke with deadly accuracy, each shot finding its mark among the Huron attackers. The crack of his weapon became a rhythm, a heartbeat of resistance. His presence seemed to bolster the castle's defenses, turning what should have been a swift victory for the Hurons into a grueling siege. The battle raged on, the castle's unique structure becoming both fortress and trap. Deerslayer moved like a shadow, appearing where he was needed most. His rifle was never silent for long, its voice a constant reminder of the thin line between life and death. But even as he fought, Deerslayer's heart ached. Tom Hutter, for all his faults, had been a fixture of this place, and now he was gone. Hetty, innocent Hetty, lay wounded, her fate uncertain. The weight of leadership pressed down on Deerslayer's shoulders like a physical burden, each decision carrying the potential for salvation or doom. The Hurons, their frustration mounting with each repelled attack, resorted to more desperate measures. Flaming arrows arced through the sky, their fiery trails painting the air with streaks of orange and red. The smell of smoke began to mingle with the gunpowder, a choking reminder of their precarious position. Diversionary attacks split the defenders' attention, stretching their already thin numbers to the breaking point. Ammunition ran low, each shot becoming more precious than gold. Fatigue set in, muscles trembling with exhaustion, eyes burning from smoke and strain. Deerslayer felt the situation slipping away, like sand through an hourglass. The relentless Huron onslaught seemed endless, a tide threatening to overwhelm them all. As the siege intensified, Deerslayer's mind raced, considering and discarding plans as quickly as he reloaded his rifle. With their options dwindling and hope fading like the day's light, he knew he had to take a risk. The time had come for bold action, for a gamble that could save them all, or doom them to failure. With a deep breath, Deerslayer began to formulate a daring plan, one that would push him and his companions to their very limits. As he opened his mouth to share his desperate strategy, a new sound cut through the chaos of battle. In the distance, barely audible above the gunfire and shouts, came the rhythmic splash of paddles cutting through water. Deerslayer's heart leaped. Could it be reinforcements, or was it just another Huron war party come to seal their fate? With the siege at its most desperate hour, the answer to that question would determine whether they lived to see another dawn. The siege of the castle had reached a fever pitch, casting a long shadow of doubt over the defenders. In this moment of dire need, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon as Chingachgook and his party, including Wadawa, arrived to bolster the defense. The air crackled with tension as the Hurons pressed their attack with renewed vigor. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic tang of blood, creating a nauseating cocktail that hung thick in the air. Deerslayer and Chingachgook, old friends reunited in the crucible of battle, moved as one. Their combined skills formed an impenetrable wall against the relentless Huron assault. Deerslayer's rifle barked, each shot finding its mark with deadly precision. His eyes, keen as a hawk's, darted across the tree line, searching for the slightest hint of movement. Beside him, Chingachgook was a silent shadow, leading daring counterattacks from the castle's lower levels. His tomahawk flashed in the sunlight, a deadly blur that struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. Judith, her heart thundering like a war drum, surprised even herself with her newfound courage. The demure maiden was gone, replaced by a fierce defender of her home. Her hands, once used to delicate needlework, now moved with purpose as she reloaded weapons and tended to the wounded. When she took up arms herself, her accuracy left the Hurons stunned and reeling. The battle reached its peak as the defenders found themselves pushed to the brink. The Hurons, like a relentless tide, breached one of the castle's outer defenses. The air filled with war cries, and the clash of steel on steel as the fight devolved into brutal hand-to-hand combat within the structure. Deerslayer, Chingachgook, and Hurry fought like men possessed, each facing multiple opponents in the confined space. Sweat stung their eyes and their muscles screamed in protest, but they fought on, driven by the primal instinct to survive. The wooden floors, slick with blood, made every step a gamble between life and death. Just as all seemed lost, with the defenders backed into their last refuge, a new sound cut through the chaos. The rhythmic beat of drums and the sharp crack of musket fire echoed across the lake, like thunder heralding a storm. British troops, drawn by the signs of conflict, arrived on the scene like avenging angels. The appearance of the red-coated soldiers turned the tide in an instant. The Hurons, caught between the hammer of the British and the anvil of the castle's defenders, broke and fled. Their retreat was as swift as their attack had been fierce, melting away into the forest like mist before the morning sun. The British commander, a weathered veteran with eyes that had seen countless battles, quickly took charge. He dispatched troops to pursue the fleeing Hurons, while others secured the castle and tended to the wounded. His voice, firm and reassuring, brought order to the chaos. As the dust settled and the last echoes of battle faded, the survivors emerged to survey the aftermath. The once pristine shores of Lake Glimmerglass were now scarred by the ravages of war. Smoke curled lazily from smoldering fires, and the ground was littered with the detritus of conflict. The British commander, his uniform still immaculate despite the day's events, approached Deerslayer and his companions. With words of high praise, he commended their bravery and officially declared an end to the siege. The safety of Lake Glimmerglass was secured, but at what cost? As the group stood there, exhausted but alive, they began to grapple with the consequences of the battle. The frontier, once a place of beauty and adventure, now seemed fraught with danger and uncertainty. They exchanged glances, each seeing in the other's eyes the weight of all they had endured and the knowledge that their lives on the frontier would never be the same. As night fell, a heavy silence descended upon the castle. The adrenaline of battle faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a creeping sense of loss. Deerslayer stood at the edge of the lake, his eyes scanning the darkening forest. The victory felt hollow, and a nagging feeling in his gut told him that this was just the beginning. What new dangers lurked in the shadows, waiting to test their resolve once more? As he turned back to the castle, a distant howl echoed across the water, sending a chill down his spine. The frontier had changed, and with it, so had they all. The survivors of the battle grappled with their losses, their hearts heavy with grief. As the dust settled, they found themselves contemplating uncertain futures in a world forever changed by recent events. The air hung thick with sorrow, as heavy as a sodden blanket. Despite their desperate efforts, Hetty slipped away like a fading whisper, her last breath barely stirring the air. Her passing left Judith as the last of her family, a solitary figure against the vast wilderness that suddenly seemed all too empty. The group gathered on a quiet hillside overlooking Lake Glimmerglass. The water's surface mirrored their solemn faces as they laid Hetty and Tom Hutter to rest. The earth seemed to sigh as it received them, the wind carrying away unspoken words and unfulfilled dreams. Leaves rustled softly, nature's own lament for the fallen. Judith stood apart, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She found herself drawn to Deerslayer, his steady presence a rock in the tumultuous sea of her emotions. With trembling hands and a voice barely above a whisper, she proposed marriage. Her words carried on a hopeful breath. "You're different, Deerslayer," she said, painting a picture of a life away from the lake that had witnessed so much pain. "With you, I see a chance for something new, something better." Deerslayer's face softened, touched by her offer. His calloused hands, testament to his chosen life, gently took hers. "Judith," he said, his voice as warm as the setting sun, "my life belongs to the frontier. It calls to me like a mother to her child." He paused, his eyes reflecting the vast wilderness behind them. "You deserve a life of refinement, a life that matches your intelligence and grace." Nearby, Chingachgook and Wadawa stood close, their bond strengthened by the fires of adversity they had walked through together. Their eyes met Deerslayer's, an unspoken invitation hanging in the air between them. It was a promise of family, of belonging among their people in the heart of the wilderness. Hurry Harry shuffled his feet, his usual bravado replaced by a newfound humility. The frontier had tested him and found him wanting. "I reckon it's time for me to find somewhere a bit more settled," he mumbled, avoiding Judith's eyes. His farewell was awkward, laden with the weight of past mistakes and foolish actions. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the time for parting arrived. Deerslayer, Chingachgook, and Wadawa stood at the edge of the forest, their figures silhouetted against the dying light. They turned to Judith, their eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Farewell, Judith," Deerslayer said, his voice carrying across the still water. "May you find the peace you seek." With those words, they melted into the forest, becoming one with the wilderness they called home. The trees seemed to embrace them, welcoming them back to the wild. Judith stood alone on the shore, the lapping of the waves against the sand the only sound breaking the silence. The castle, once full of life and conflict, now loomed behind her, a silent sentinel to all that had passed. She hugged herself, feeling the weight of solitude pressing down upon her like a physical force. As she watched the spot where her friends had disappeared, Judith's mind raced with possibilities. The pull of civilization tugged at her, promising a new beginning far from the memories that haunted this place. Yet the lake whispered to her, its familiar shores offering the comfort of home. The water lapped at her feet, cool and constant, a reminder of all she had known. The departure of her companions marked more than just an end to their shared adventures. It signaled a shift, as inexorable as the changing seasons. Civilization marched onward, pushing against the wild frontier. And Judith, standing at the crossroads of her life, faced an uncertain future alone. As night fell, stars began to twinkle above, reflected in the vast expanse of Lake Glimmerglass. It stretched before her like the blank pages of an unwritten story, full of possibility and promise. Judith took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the crisp night air. Whatever path she chose, she would face it with the strength and resilience forged in the crucible of her experiences. The wilderness had changed them all, leaving its indelible mark on their souls. As Judith turned to face her future, she carried with her the lessons of the frontier, its harshness, its beauty, and its unyielding spirit. The story of the deer slayer and his companions had come to an end, but for Judith, a new chapter was just beginning.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.